This episode is sponsored by Friskies, who would like to tell your cats hi. Now, if that didn't get your cat's attention, there is one thing that always does the trick. Just pour some Friskies crunchy food in the bowl and you'll hear those paws come running. Works every time. With so many Friskies choices, you can always bring your cats running from their secret napping spots. There's always more to explore. See for yourself at friskies.com or visit your local store.
How do you top your love for your cat? With a cascade of decadent savory gravy over a mouth-watering mousse pâté. Fancy Feast gems. 2 gourmet pâtés in one convenient pack. Simply peel and plate to reveal a pyramid shape that makes eating delightful and pamper her with an experience as extraordinary as she is. Turn the everyday into the extraordinary with Fancy Feast gems.
The McDonald's snack wrap is back. You brought it back. Ranch snack wrap. Spicy snack wrap. You broke the internet for a snack. Snack wrap is back. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Welcome to the New Books Network.
I'm Chris Holmes, and this is Burned by Books. Here you'll find interviews with writers you already love, like Jennifer Egan and Rebecca Mackay, mixed in with up-and-coming voices like Alexandra Kleeman and Rumaan Alam. You'll find us wherever you listen to podcasts, but check out previous episodes at burnedbybooks.com and on Instagram and Twitter at burnedbybooks. Let's start the show. Few writers working today have had more influence on American style and voice as my guest, Rachel Kushner. Rachel's novels get labeled and praised rightly as cool, but in unpacking that easy description, one finds a craft that feels at once organic while thoughtfully handling intellectual work on the politics, ethics, and history of outside communities, in a whirling machine of character and plot that spins and dizzies in the most delightful way. Rachel's latest, Creation Lake, now long-listed for the National Book Award, takes the form of a spy thriller, where the agent in question, Sadie, infiltrates a group of extremist environmentalists led by a charismatic cult-like figure whose moral fluidity matches Sadie's in uncommon and unexpected ways. But a typical sacred agent story this is not. Creation Lake takes the nature of a spy, their focus and observation and even their paranoia, and uses those basic elements to force us to defamiliarize and reframe certain crucial ethical and political questions about the state of our world and our planet today. Sadie's plotting and scheming is refracted through the writings of a man named Bruno Lacombe, who is an intellectual patriarch to young activists. It is indeed Bruno's words, Neanderthals were prone to depression, that begin the novel, pointing to a distant past of human civilization as a possible model for living differently now. And it is Bruno's thinking that will inveigle itself into Sadie's work and thinking as an agent for an unknown entity, subtly destabilizing that which allows her to pursue her work with neutrality. Told with precision and a beat-by-beat drive that builds toward what seems like inevitable violence and chaos, Creation Lake joins Rachel's canon as another unique voice that defies expectation at every turn. Rachel Kushner is the author of the novels Creation Lake, The Mars Room, The Flamethrowers, and Telex from Cuba, a book of short stories, The Strange Case of Rachel K., and The Hard Crowd, Essays 2000 to 2020. She has been a finalist for the Booker Prize, the National Book Critics Circle Award, the Folio Prize, and the James Tate Black Prize, the Dayton Literary Peace Prize, and is now 3 times a finalist for the National Book Award in Fiction. She is a Guggenheim Foundation Fellow and the recipient of a Harold D. Versal Memorial Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Welcome to the show, Rachel Kushner. So, Sadie has such a unique voice. She is wry, she is largely as neutral as Switzerland, and pragmatic to the point of deviousness. How did this voice come to you, and did you always know she was going to be a secret agent?
Yeah, in terms of Sadie, it's interesting because she has an absolute monopoly in terms of speaking in this novel. I previously had, even when my narrator was first person in both the Mars Room and the Flamethrowers, I would get to a point where I realized I had to let someone else speak in order to produce the kind of amplitude I wanted in terms of world, like allowing other voices in so that they could share their version of things. And with this novel, I stuck to my original plan to have only her speak, but developing that voice took a while, I should say. Originally, I have long wanted to write a novel that would be set among a group of French anarchists who've decamped from Paris to a kind of communal living structure in a remote rural outpost. And I chose southwestern France because I know the area intimately. And so it would be very fun for me to reproduce, even as I sort of set it within the kind of, I might say, the gauze of fiction, but it's meant to feel very believable and real. But I wanted the freedom to kind of aggregate details from different places and not produce something like tourist literature where the reader goes, oh, I know this town and I've been in that church and I know this river, et cetera. But so I had this situation with this group of young people who are set on a collision course with the French state. And that seemed like a fun and promising predicament, and also just something that I was interested in and that I know something about just on a personal level. And then I became interested in this question of prehistory because the science is changing all the time. And it suddenly occurred to me, like, this is the ultimate subject for the novelist to go in and try to speculate on life before the written down. And in the natural course of thinking through things and reading a lot, I realized it's worth also speculating on why we do that, what that kind of ideation is, what sort of longing it's evidence of. What I didn't have, to answer your question, is I didn't have the voice of the person who can connect all these things. And I wanted my narrator to be American, but why is she in this place among these French people? Is she a sort of idealist who wants to join their commune and is rejected? That would have been one way of doing it. There were multiple ways of doing it. And then after about 3 years of, that's just the gestation of the novel can be very slow and little can happen. It can be difficult. And then all of a sudden, it's very exciting and fast. That seems to be a rhythm for me. In this case, I sat down one day and I was thinking about this idea for a character who became the character in the book named Bruno Lacombe, and him having this musing about Neanderthals being prone to depression and addiction, which is a sort of distorted or hyperbolic rephrasing of some of what you find in the literature, like that in their genome, there seems to be a propensity to anhedonic thinking. And so I thought, okay, so Bruno is an outlet for me of somebody who's thinking about prehistory. And it is symptomatic of these kinds of romantic longings in terms of where humanity took its wrong turn. But when I wrote the first sentence of the book, which became verbatim the first sentence as it stands now, I realized that it was somebody else reproducing from Bruno's letters and reading them. And so it had this like delay in it where he said, and it's Sadie reading his letters. I'm sorry, this is a little bit abstract, but I started to write that first page of the book, and by instinct, I saw that she was not reading the letters necessarily in good faith, that she was going to pause and be snarky and editorialize. And it was through that, the pausing, that I realized, oh, she has arrived to this commune, Le Moulin, not with good intentions, but in fact to harm these people. And I had been reading kind of all in one run the novels of a French crime writer named Jean-Patrick Manchette, who died in the 90s. He wrote these novels in the 70s, and they're incredibly funny and kind of like overwhelming in their use of, I don't know, extreme violence, but also to comic effect. But maybe reading him emboldened me or planted the idea that she would be some kind of secret agent. In addition, there have been cases where people hired by either the U.S. spying organization like the FBI or in the metropolitan UK have been hired to surveil leftist organizations. And I have had friends of friends who've had contact with these people over the years. So it was something that I knew a little about. Like, I knew enough to know it was possible to construct a person like Sadie. And the more I got into her voice, the more promising and logical it seemed to be to have a narrator who was both malicious and an agent of destruction, and also somebody who possessed a lot of qualities that I myself lack. And it was almost like a 180-degree reversal. I put her in a situation where she's observing a bunch of people for whom I would naturally have a certain amount of sympathy or even a lot of sympathy. And instead, it's this kind of caustic, harmful woman. And I just wanted to see where that would go. It was unusual for me and fun and exciting and a big challenge, which is what I think the novel in part should be.
So Sadie is infiltrating this left-wing movement run by a charismatic absolutist. And politics for Sadie, as you say, is kind of treated snarkily. But it's always for her corrupted by the fragility of an individual's identity and search for that identity and ego. It initially matters little for Sadie which political movement holds a kind of moral or ethical right. Hers is a world untouched by the doctrinaire. How does Sadie's vision of politics color the narrative? And are we able to see politics outside of Sadie's pretty claustrophobic sensibility?
Right. Well, to the second part, hopefully, yes, the reader can see outside of her, as you call it, more claustrophobic sensibility. I mean, her sensibility is not meant to be taken by the reader absolutely on faith. I mean, part of the humor is that she's so sardonic, and that kind of humor only works when you presume that the witness to your jokes has a more wholesome sensibility. Because otherwise, it's nihilism plus nihilism. It's sort of like, I'm not comparing myself to Celine, but it's like Celine is incredibly funny. But if the reader shared his same streak of nihilism, the literature might not have the force that it does. So when somebody is reading Sadie, I think she assumes, as do I, or rather the voice is calibrated in a way that the reader is meant to be a little taken aback by some of what she's so casual about in terms of, what other people believe quite strongly and have ideas that life is subtended by some structure of meaning, whether it is a religious meaning or an ethical order or some third thing. But maybe primarily those two. If you live without those things, it's shocking to people who live with them. And in terms of, she's hired by, she doesn't say, and maybe if there's some way in which she is exploited as a subject in the book, it's by her bosses, whoever they are. And she says at one point, she's sitting in the Hotel Meurice in the bar in Paris, looking around and saying, the men who are here now, who are sort of like captains of industry and government ministers and judges and lawyers, if these are not my bosses, they might as well be, because this is what they look like. This is who they are. So, she's been hired by the powers that be, but it does benefit her when she's screwing over other people to point out that those other people live mired in contradiction, because it sort of lets her off the hook for her own bad behavior. And I think that that's meant to be somewhat clear to the reader. But whether I've pulled it off or not, I cannot say. But to me, the magic trick of her voice is that sometimes she says things that might seem true, that
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
someone might even agree with. And when she says that there are no politics inside of people,
Mm-hmm.
that was probably on some level me saying that, not because I'd prepared an argument and believed that myself, but because I wanted to make that statement and see where it took me and find out what was underneath it as a
Yeah.
sweeping surface declaration. Because sometimes one can see that people's identities are fragile, and some of what passes for politics on occasion also seems to do double duty as ego formation for people, in terms of how they define themselves
Yeah.
in
I mean,
in
we see that front and center in every American political season, I think.
Yeah, I'm also, I guess, thinking of like younger people who sort of define themselves on the ultra left, which,
Mm-hmm.
on some level, that's sort of how I've been largely self-defined over many years. But I'm
So that early ego and identity formation.
yeah, and I'm less impressed with people needing to let others know what their politics are, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
And it's not really about registering your bona fides. And I think that Sadie has been around long enough and has circulated through these different milieu, if you will, even if it's for malicious intent. She's seen enough to recognize other people's contradictions. But, living without any moral identity doesn't really position you best to, to level critiques at other people.
Mm-hmm.
But so in terms of the political thing, I also think it's worth thinking about what politics means. The thinnest application of it is to like the topical news cycle and how people define themselves vis-a-vis the political order. But she does concede that there may be something deeper in terms of whether people have a root idea inside of what she calls their 4 a.m. self. An idea, of how life should be lived. And when I say how life should be lived, I think she's thinking of whether life should be lived in a way that is about equality or not.
Mm-hmm.
Finding a new job is stressful. But with Indeed, it doesn't have to be. Just fill out your Indeed profile with your skills, experience, and desired salary. The more you fill out, the better your matches will be. And hearing from hiring managers will be 2 times more likely. Relax. That's your Indeed profile sending opportunities your way. Indeed, the world can work better.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso Virtual Coffee Machines. Ready to enjoy the bold flavors of barista-quality Nespresso iced coffee at home? Simply fill a glass with ice and press the brew button on your virtual pop machine to enjoy rich double espressos roasted to stand up even when chilled. Refreshingly bold iced coffee. Refreshingly easy to make at home. Visit Nespresso.com to shop now.
Yeah. So, and this is where I want to return to Sadie as filtered through Bruno and his letters, and this idea of this man who writes in almost a monastic voice with an awareness of the world and the deep history of humanity, and Sadie who sort of sits on that surface level where she can be sardonic and scathing, but she is essentially sort of starting to filter herself through his words and to see herself differently through those words. Could you talk a little bit about that interaction between text and character?
Yeah. Do you mean his texts and her?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, a couple of things I would say about that. First, just in terms of like I mentioned that the first line that I wrote of her was her rendering him. Neanderthals were prone to depression. I was thinking originally, although the effect is very different ultimately, but that's fine. We all need to be sparked. At least I'm very sparked by the outside world, and I'll see something, and then the way that it gets transmuted through me, hopefully, it becomes something new. But when I wrote that line, I was thinking of the first line of a movie by Chris Marker called Sans Soleil. I don't know if you know this film.
I don't know it, no.
It's an essay film, largely about Japan, but it's told by a woman. She has a very beautiful voice and an English accent. And then there's film footage, and then there's her voice in voiceover. It's an essay film. And the first line is something like, "The first thing he told me about was 3 children on a road in Iceland in 1965. And there's a he, and he told me about, and the idea is that she is reporting on these letters that she's been receiving. It's a fictional character who was like an alter ego for Chris Marker. But I love this film. I've seen it many times. It's close.
Sounds extraordinary.
It is extraordinary. And, and it's not sardonic like Sadie. It's a completely different sort of mood. But somehow the use of an intermediary to report on a shadowy figure and what they have to say about the world and their belief system and their musings and their longings and laments was, I think, borrowed by me from Chris Marker to start that off, that first line. Then she pulls back. She's a little more sarcastic and doubting about his kind of romantic investment in what I call his beautiful loser vis-a-vis the Neanderthal.
Yeah.
But I ended up coming away from the book thinking of his portions of it as something like sermons. And like you say,
Yeah, very much.
Which is similar. To me, he is the heart of the book, and he was somebody who has a set of ideas about where the wrong turn was taken and how we might renovate our thoughts on the manner in which life should be lived. And it didn't seem like it would be possible, much less interesting, for Sadie to maintain her ironic distance from him over the course of the book. Because as he keeps going, he goes, no pun intended, deeper. Even as he lives in the cave, he goes deeper into his own personal history, his entire family dying in concentration camps during World War II, him living through a series of great utopian ideals for revolutions in cities across Europe, none of which came to pass. Moving to the countryside, thinking that there's something pure in the spirit of the peasant class in France, that coming to naught, and then finally retreating with some sense that you could revolutionize your own consciousness rather than change the world. And one question, for me as the writer and for the book and the way it's all woven together was, at what point will her levee fail and Bruno's spirit might make incursions into her? So that became one of the tensions of the book, is that she's reading these letters, and at a certain point she says, I was meant to read them to locate evidence that he's guiding these people to plan property destruction. But that's not there, and yet she keeps reading them anyhow. And she, by structure, is quite isolated among these people because none of them have any idea who she really is. It's not clear that she even has a relationship to her own identity, if there's such a pure thing in a woman like her. I mean, all of her past story that she provides to the reader, which was kind of my own fun formal rule, which was that any backstory to her was just going to be backstory that recounted prior dissimulations of hers where she's screwed over other people, like the ones she's hoping and planning to screw over now. But so for such an isolated person whose name is not known, who says, that you people aren't even real to me, as she doesn't say to them, but says to the reader, it seemed natural that her one companion would come to seem to be Bruno, almost as if she would forget or be prone to the delusion that he's writing the letters to her.
Yeah, yeah. And so, and these letters and what you've been talking about in terms of this sort of like connection across a sort of deep time is, for me, really the leitmotif of Creation Lake. This question of how we can access a kind of a connection to the humanity that has come before us and touch the lives of those who lived before or in other places in order to better understand the dilemmas of our present. And this comes through in Bruno's writing about the caves and the Neanderthals who painted on them with the texture of a painting of a bear leaving a trace behind. And then later it is salt for Sadie that lives eternally and offers a touch of that deep time. What drew you to this concept, and how does it interact with these ideas of political utopianism?
Well, a few things I could say. I mean, I fear that it all kind of becomes like arch self-mythology after you've written a book, what you say about what you do. Because I'm not sure I can remember enough to be able to reconstruct my own path into the thing. But
even what you just think of it now that the book is out of your hands and lives in the minds of others.
Yeah, I mean, which is exciting because then that's maybe when you start to finally be afforded some glimpse of what you actually did. But in terms of inspiration, I got interested in the idea of prehistory and the great mystery of like life before the written down when I was finishing my novel, The Mars Room. And there had been a lot of pretty cataclysmic scientific advancements in terms of like mapping the genome of the Neanderthal and also the Denisovan. And it seemed to kind of upend everything in terms of the archaeological record, because suddenly it looked like human migration patterns were totally different than what people thought they were.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started reading things about that. And I even for a while thought, wouldn't that be a kind of incredible swerve if I just wrote a novel that was a love story, between or was rather about contact between different strains of human species in Europe and or Eurasia 35,000 years ago? It would have been really hard to pull off.
Yeah, I think so.
And I kind of decided that like the one person I think who could do that would have been the one American writer would have been Cormac McCarthy, because he's so
what a great call on that.
Yeah, well, because he's a behaviorist, meaning like he can just describe people doing and being from outside, men breaking rocks with other rocks. Like Cormac could go to town with that. The other person maybe would be Clarice Lispector, a non-American writer.
Yeah.
And it would just be all about this kind of like ontological zone. I mean, she can write from the point of view of a chicken and has, and convincingly. For me, it just didn't seem like it was going to have enough of, it wouldn't call for enough of what it is that I can do. I didn't know what kind of mood could be put among these people. And a lot of what I draw from as mood is created by culture, because I'm a creature of culture. I live for it to some degree. But I was thinking about that. And then, it's kind of like there's a left doxa, which is probably somewhat correct, or at least it's a quite reasonable inference to draw that the wrong turn for humanity was the agricultural revolution, 10 or 12,000 years ago. That this is when, there was a land grab, the commons were closed, people started to live in density, and there was a structure of profit where, you no longer live by the kind of free dictates of hunting and gathering, but in fact just toil on farms for other people who own that land, et cetera. Anyway,
Right, yeah.
So I guess I just thought, what if Bruno is somebody who takes the wrong turn of humanity way backward into some deeper moment? I mean, I remember, like reading like Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari like many years ago, and this idea that the Homo sapien was really comfortable being in large crowds, many, many people in one place. And then looking at like what the speculation is on Neanderthal propagation, it's like fewer children, smaller clans. It seemed like it would be relatively easy for a character, a fictional character, not a real person, to start to really romanticize the idea that they had a more attuned sensitivity to the earth and their own impact on it. Also, so Neanderthal art, there are not as many examples of it in the archaeological record thus far as there are with the kind of dazzling figurative work of the Homo sapien left in places like Lascaux, famously.
Yeah, that documentary is if nothing else makes you feel connected to a long history of humanity, that documentary will.
You mean about Chauvet,
Yeah, Chauvet, yeah.
Right. The Herzog film.
Yeah, the Herzog.
Cave of Forgotten Dreams. Yeah, it's amazing that he was able to do that. But so, I mean, I never got to go into Lascaux. I remember when it was still marginally open, and I was working with the art curator, Walter Hopps, who got to go. And now there's a simulacrum that you can visit. My son's been inside. I never have. I have been in some of the other caves that you can still visit that have colored drawings on the walls. But, as Bruno's argument is that the art of the Homo sapien is all reproductions of people eating and killing. So he kind of like puts it into the category of what's wrong with a human, whereas what's been found of Neanderthal art is abstract markings on bone and rock. So in my fun with Bruno, he's romanticizing the Neanderthal as the true artist, because abstract art to him is a much bigger leap and a more deep expression of creativity than reproducing your acquisitions and your destruction of the world beyond you. So like they haven't found a lot of Neanderthal art, and some of it, there'll be like a cross on a rock and somebody's arguing, these are just residue from somebody sharpening an instrument on this rock. And someone else is like, no, like this is their art. And a lot of it is very speculative. And so it lends itself pretty easily to fiction and just having a character who kind of has a philosophical bent of mind and really wants to think about these things.
Mm-hmm. So can we talk about lice for a second?
Sure.
Because one of the, I think, really profound moments that comes out of Bruno's deep dive into his family's history is the part of the narrative in which a soldier's stolen helmet gives young Bruno lice, and the infestation on his head becomes this metaphor for how one life passes to another, an itch that reminds us that we are all part of a chain of humanity. This is such I think, a brilliant metaphor. It reminded me in kind of an abstract way of John Donne's Flea as the thing that bites the two people at this bar and therefore contains both of them and is like the marriage bed. And so I wondered if you'd talk about lice for a little bit.
I love that you asked that. That's the first time someone's asked me this question. Yeah. So, Bruno recounts this kind of, what he calls a primal scene of after being cooped up when the Germans rampaged through the area where he had been taken to live with a woman, an older woman, not his own grandmother, during the war to be kept safe because he's half Jewish. The Germans did rampage through the particular area of southwest France where I'm sort of secretly setting the book. And you see monuments everywhere that, memorialize the people that they killed as they rampaged through. But he's let out of after being cooped up and with a band of other boys, and they come upon the body of a dead German soldier, and the older boys who have more courage approaching the body, rifling the pockets to see if there's something worth taking. It seems like that's already occurred because there's no weapon on this soldier, but his helmet is nearby, and Bruno picks that. And, with these like moments of discovery in childhood, I think that I realize now, I was thinking that when you think you've kind of like hit on a windfall, when you've hit the jackpot, like it's not clear that you really have when you find something and pick it up, put it on.
As a kid, you're sure that it's invaluable.
Yeah, it's like you'll pick something up and it turns out there's a hornet's nest in it, or it's covered with ants, or you get poison oak. There's always some catch to whatever you think you've obtained. And he gets the helmet, which the other kids are jealous of, and puts it on. And it turns out that it has lice in it. I actually took this from an essay, which I haven't read in a really long time, but read long ago, that must have made an impression, by the poet Charles Simic. There's a book of his called Reading Philosophy at Night. I think that's also the name of this essay. And he talks about finding a helmet on the ground as a boy during World War II. I think he was born in 1938. The weirdest thing is, after I wrote this section, the next day I saw in the news that he had died.
My goodness.
I know, it's strange. I mean, I know I'm not inflating myself to think I'm part of some cosmic chain that contains Charles Simic, but the thought is occurring to me that so the lice in that part of the book that you ask about do become for Bruno an evocative metaphor for the idea of chains of transmission, because they go from the previously warm head of a living German soldier to the newly warm head of a French boy. And Bruno uses them to think about chains of life and also DNA. Like, we have inside of us, it's quite strange, evidence and little integers on our chromosomes of every single person who came before us. And that is so strange to me. And I think, so we have inside of us evidence of everyone who came before us all the way up the line, as though it's like a chain that flows upward beyond us into the heavens, but the direction is time rather than space. It's wild to me. They're now able to locate on the chromosome evidence of what are called ghost populations, so that they can see there on the DNA that there was someone there that they don't have more data about yet. And it means that they haven't found those people in the archaeological record. And as Bruno puts it, that means basically that we haven't found their trash, Like, we don't have a cache of the bones of the animals that they ate, or the broken tools that they used to kill and skin and prepare those animals for consumption. But so this idea of a lineage that's transitioned and leaps from one person to the next, the lice become a sort of metaphor for that, if you will. The way that they go from the head of the living soldier to the head of the living boy. So the fact that Charles Simic died right after I wrote that, it almost seemed like I borrowed from him, but it's also as if there was a migration of his own.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
From his book of essays to my novel. And I'm thinking about what was quite clearly a primal scene for him, and opening it for examination so that it can continue to be interrogated. But I also can say that, I'm a parent. My kid's now 17. He's not bringing home lice any longer. But
You never know.
well, yeah, I'm familiar enough with lice, as most parents are. And, I had them a few times, and I kind of decided I could be grossed out by this, But then again, Rimbaud had lice. Like all these exciting, sexy poets had lice, and you just figure, this is part of the human chain too.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
With a major selection of the looks your kiddos love, starting at just $4 in the Walmart app, a new school year means a stylish new them. Who knew? Find skater skirts and Crocs that say, I'm casual but cool. Sparkly sneakers that say, it's my classroom, you're just learning in it. And preppy polos that say, I'm the teacher's pet, even if they're mommy's menace at home. Find their favorite styles starting at just $4 in the app. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new.
I think you're the first person to equate lice with sexiness and poetry. So I think we should take that as our new standard, that it is both an itchy pain and also perhaps a connection to Rimbaud.
Well, yeah, so having had them and then having read the Charles Simic, it was just fun to write about. And also it's like that's the fun of writing is then you get to these moments where, like Bruno makes this statement that, it isn't washing with kerosene, which I remember my mother got lice. She was traveling around Europe as like a young bohemian and got them somewhere along the way. And then she washed her hair with kerosene, but that didn't kill them. And that's what people used to do. And Bruno says, whether by kerosene or some other method, lice will go only when they are ready.
That's so interesting. I want to talk for a second about violence. And it's interesting to me that Sadie, who's infiltrated this political communal society, has a very pragmatic view of violence. She says if she wants to smash something, she's going to do it with a hammer. And as well, Pascal and his
Sledgehammer.
A sledgehammer. And as well, Pascal says that he thinks of violence as a necessary component and even a faultless component of proceeding with a political reparation and understanding of the world. And so I'm wondering what the sort of Venn diagram of violence is for Sadie and Pascal's communal group.
I think that Pascal is speaking in a slightly abstract manner, and he's talking about tribe of uncontacted people.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And, I happen to know that he's talking about the people who live on Sentinel Island, which is in the Bay of Bengal. And I think they are considered to be the least contacted people on Earth.
And did they, in fact, kill an anthropologist who showed up on shore?
Well, I think I changed that in the final version of the book to two fishermen.
Oh, fascinating. My ARC is incorrect.
They killed two fishermen. It could have been an anthropologist. That would have been fine. But because the story is somewhat recognizable, I don't know why I decided to change it to two fishermen. But they attempted to kill every person who's come ashore. They've attempted to kill. And then they killed a missionary named John Chow. It was a sort of famous incident. He had convinced himself that it was his calling in life to try to convert these people to Christianity. And yeah, this is like talk about violence. I'm not saying Christianity is violent, but the idea of violating the order of the Indian government, which has a buffer zone and a absolute no-go rule, like you're not supposed to go within 2 miles of the circumference of that island. It's a very strange situation. I actually wrote a column about it for Harper's Magazine when I was doing a regular column for them. But so they killed John Chow, who showed up with a waterproof rubber Bible and a bunch of tchotchkes, hoping to ingratiate himself to them. And the minute he attempted to come on shore, they shot an arrow that hit him in the neck, and his body has never been recovered. And there were two fishermen who I think got drunk and fell asleep in their boat and drifted a little too close to that island and were killed. And Pascal in the novel is talking to Sadie without using specific examples without naming the Sentinelese. He says something about an uncontacted
tribe.
And then he says that their version of killing is the purest innocence. Like he says something like, the man who shot that arrow, like, is the most innocent man on earth. And I think he's thinking into what innocence means in a world where there are two different worlds in one. Because, just to go back to the Sentinelese, they live in their own moral structure and their own moral universe. And so I think Pascal is right to say that their moral structure cannot be judged by our moral structure. And in any case, on what ground do we have the right to talk about humanity and ethics and morality? But he's also a bit romantic in that claim, and because Sadie is not, she challenges it privately, but also takes note to herself that Pascal has a romantic idea of violence and is probably not at all capable of committing any on his own. And what she's looking for is a willing partner to be her, sort of stooge, as she puts it.
Yeah.
And the only person in that group who is capable of violence turns out to be this older American who has kind of washed up on the shores of France after several different kind of failed iterations of his life. And that is this character Birdmore Model, who also happens to have been in a previous novel of mine, The Flamethrowers.
Yeah, which is an extraordinary novel. Rachel, before I let you go, I was wondering if you'd be willing to recommend anything that you've been reading and loving recently.
Well, what comes to mind more easily, Chris, if this is all right, two books that I have long admired, but became, I would say, sort of critical sparks for me in Creation Lake were Child of God by Cormac McCarthy. I really like early Cormac.
Me too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's very underrated.
Yeah, so like the first three novels, Outer Dark, The Orchard Keeper.
Yeah, The Orchard Keeper, yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Outer Dark, The Orchard Keeper, and Child of God are all fantastic. But there is something about Child of God and the way that he structured the book, the shortness of the chapters, the way he uses blank space on the page. It's totally different than the way it sometimes gets used, whether successfully or not is not my place to judge, but sometimes it's meant to kind of give a ellipsis, in the form of white space, like, ooh, what you just said is very poetic and evocative, and we'll skip a lot and then move on to the next thing. And instead, it's more like spring-loaded with him, like the little chapter ends and you move on to the next. And so with that book, Child of God, not for everybody, I should say, but that's the thing with art, a lot of it is not for everybody, but it's a novel about a hillbilly necrophiliac who is pursued by the authorities into this underground cave structure. It's like either Kentucky or East Tennessee. I actually can't remember. But, the region is not as important as the fact that it's this character who is seen in the first chapter from outside, from some mysterious narrator who only comes back into the book at the very end. And there's a way in which he just does so much in just a couple of tiny paragraphs. And I kept looking at that book and asking myself, how does he do it? And I really studied the first 2 pages of that book and wanted very much to produce for myself my own version of that kind of pacing, where my book would have like 1 or 2 page chapters that are meant to have enough force in the final sentence that they would just push the reader into the next chapter. Like, I wanted that kind of propulsion. Not to say that it's created by like cliffhangers. It's something a little more mysterious. But so that was an important book to me. And then I haven't teased out like what, it does happen to all take place in caves, the second half, and that can't be a coincidence. But when I think of that book, it's about pacing and it's about the tone.
Mm-hmm.
Another book that I looked at again and realized later plays a role in how I developed the voice of Sadie is Pale Fire.
Wonderful.
By Nabokov. And more, I feel like Nabokov is such an American author. I know people love to, talk about how English was his second or even his third language, but I think he always spoke it. 2 years old. He's a natural, practically native speaker of English. And the American landscape and our versions of, vulgarity and violence, but imagination and incredible creative force are, I think, the métier of Nabokov. And this character studying the poetry of John Shade and finding himself, I think he's in a roadside motor court motel with an amusement park right nearby. It's the way that the voice is meant to be very arrogant and controlled, but also can't resist letting leak in eruptions from the environment around him, and the textual basis, if you will, of Nabokov, of
Charles Kinbote.
All right, so just this textual relationship between Charles Kinbote, the narrator, the obviously mad narrator. I mean, he's much more of a classically unreliable narrator than what I conceived of Sadie as. I kind of think she's reliable, but then she starts to crack, but reliably portrays her own cracking. But Kinbote's a little different, but the textual relationship between him and the poet John Shade is like, I love how he pulls that off. And I wanted to pull off this textual relationship between Sadie and Bruno Lacombe. And I didn't at all want Bruno's passages to seem like, okay, now we're taking a long break from the present action to dip into this other thing. Like, I never wanted it to feel spiritually or literally like you're reading in italics. Because as a reader, I become impatient when a book is structured that way, and I just want to get through those parts and get back to the present action. And so the question was how to bring tension into those places, even more tension, so that you want to come back to Bruno rather than be Sadie. And I think that Pale Fire it sets a very high bar. It puts things into relief in terms of what can be done. And his sense of humor is it's very exciting as a reader.
Yeah, and it's fun to live in Ithaca, and I actually have a friend who inhabits his old office at Cornell. And
oh, that's cool, really.
And you see his there are plaques that he lived everywhere in Ithaca. He moved like a million times, so there are plaques all over the place that say that it was Nabokov's house. So you sort of feel him a bit in town.
Yeah, I lived in Ithaca for a year, but I don't think I was in one of Nabokov's old houses. I was down on Plain Street downtown.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But yeah, I think those Child of God and Pale Fire, those books are close to my heart. And with every novel, it's like it's a different little shelf in the library. And in this case, I think those two were elemental.
Well, those are very worthwhile recommendations, but I can't recommend enough Creation Lake by Rachel Kushner. This book follows in a lineage of truly extraordinary novels, of which The Mars Room and The Flamethrowers are two of my favorite, and I feel like this joins them. It's such a unique voice. I love the character of Sadie, and I love Bruno's voice filtered through Sadie. And I just can't thank you enough for coming on to talk about it, Rachel. It was wonderful.
Chris, thank you so much. Thanks for reading the book and having me as a guest on your show.
It was indeed my pleasure. Well, that's all from me for now. My thanks to Rachel Kushner for coming on to talk about her latest novel, Creation Lake, which has just been longlisted for the National Book Award. You can find links to purchase Creation Lake and all of Rachel's recommended books at the website, burnedbybooks.com. There you'll find all of our previous episodes, links to buy a podcast t-shirt, and ways to get in contact. As you listen, take a moment to rate the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. Until next time, this has been Burned by Books.